But then when I went back to London, it was like the same old consulting stuff, and I didn't find it interesting. And so I decided I was going to leave, and I took a leave of absence. And a peer of mine got promoted to manager, which is the next level up. And I remember being very jealous of that, even though I had decided to leave.
Mm.
Like I decided to leave, but I was still focused, like, oh, that guy got
Right.
promoted.
What does it take to lead billion-dollar companies and stay grounded in who you are? Today, my guest is Chris Tsakalakis. He's a former CEO of StubHub, Vivino, Kiva, and an ex-consultant at Bain. Today, he's an advisor to some of the world's top startups and nonprofits. Chris has led through hypergrowth, crisis, and reinvention. But what stands out most is how open he is about what it felt like and how he decided to leave certain opportunities. We talk about taking feedback after years of defensiveness, why money didn't shape him the way you'd think, and the moment he realized his life was dressing for the job, not for himself. If you're ever chasing big goals or figuring out what matters after you've hit them, this one's for you. So, Chris, I'll kick off. It's such a pleasure to have you here. I've obviously genuinely been looking forward to this conversation,
Okay.
not just because of your track record, which is remarkable, but because of how openly you've reflected on your own journey publicly, which very few obviously have the opportunity to do. You've led companies through hypergrowth, crisis, transformations. But what I find most compelling is how you think about your vision behind your work, so your identity and purpose. It's very rare to find someone who's more intentional about these topics. So today I do want to explore sort of both sides of it, the stories that people do see, which is your career, and the stories that people don't, which what it is it actually felt like to live it. I want to start kind of right at the beginning. You moved from Bain to eBay and then became president of StubHub shortly thereafter. These are obviously very different roles. Consulting, corporate tech, consumer marketplace, they demand completely different things. I want to explore what fears, anxieties, nervousness you sort of carried throughout these transitions. We obviously all live very anxious lives, I think more so now than ever, and often feel like we're also living for other people, almost never for ourselves. So I wanted to explore your arc through this lens. Let's start at the beginning. So you're a young consultant at Bain. You just started right out of undergrad. What are some things that you felt held you back from reaching your full potential? What was it like starting out, and what was it like throughout?
Well, I think at Bain, the thing that probably worked against me the most was my style or attitude. And on its surface, I had this confidence that bordered on arrogance, although most people didn't say bordered. And I think underneath was a deep sense of insecurity. So if I had been really more secure in myself and my abilities, I think I probably wouldn't have been such an arrogant asshole, to put it more bluntly. And part of it was a little bit of the way I grew up was different than most people because my parents are immigrants. They came from Greece to the United States just before I was born. I worked for my dad. That was my first job from the age of 12 till the age of 20 every summer and some cases on weekends during the school year. And my dad is, as he will describe himself, rough, tough, like an alligator bag. Um, and he was very abrupt. I mean, smart guy, but didn't finish high school. So I kind of learned to be very direct and so forth. And that rubbed people the wrong way in a consulting and, in this very professional consulting environment. I had a couple of summer internships where I worked in an office and wore a suit.
Mhm.
And that meant I got out of the heat working on a construction site. Um, but going into Bain, I didn't have a long experience with that and being cordial and, asking for things. If you were in the way in my family, they would just say, move. They wouldn't say, can you get out of the way, please? So it was a
Right.
different type of dynamic. And I don't mean to blame my parents. I think they gave me a strong work ethic and a very clear sense of right and wrong. But that was part of it. And I think subconsciously, this idea like, okay, yes, I went to an Ivy League school and I was a good student, but I don't really know the subtle parts of the culture in this type of professional environment because I didn't grow up in that environment.
Absolutely. And I wanted to unpack that a little bit. You mentioned insecurity and arrogance sort of together. So you obviously came from, you mentioned your parents sort of came from this more rugged background. You went to an Ivy League school, went into professional services. Where did this sort of insecurity come from? How did the arrogance sort of layer on top of that? How did those two things sort of interact over the years?
Well, I mean, this happens. It's not just happening. It didn't just happen to me. I had a very so in order to deal with my insecurity, I was very much a perfectionist, and being a perfectionist means that you're not really open to criticism of what you do because everything you do is perfect, right? I mean, this is convoluted logic,
Right.
but this is the logic that I carried, I think. The
Mhm.
example I'll give you is my performance reviews. They were absolutely horrible for whoever was giving me the review because I was so
Right.
defensive. It was really this defensiveness. I was so defensive
Mm.
of any criticism, like who said that and how did that go? You know, that was my response to like, here's some feedback on how you can get better. And Bain was famous in the performance reviews for giving you the sandwich where you had like
Right.
the bread was the nice fluffy bread, like the positive stuff, and in the middle they
Right.
gave you like all the negative stuff, and then to end they would end with some more fluffy positive stuff. That was the sandwich. And I knew about
Right.
the sandwich. Everyone knew about the sandwich, and I was like, no one's going to get any meat on me, you know. Uh, and these were people who were trying to help me, but I felt like they were criticizing me. I was working really hard, um, and they were criticizing me, and I was not going to allow it. Like no one's going to do that to me, and
Mm.
I felt attacked, even though that was not the intent. So
Mm.
I've learned that if you want to work well with people, assume positive intent. I most of my life I've not done that, not done that. Like I assume someone is trying to get something over on
Right.
me, and so that was
Right.
one part of it, one manifestation of it. But I was also very
Hmm.
impatient. Um, and especially impatient with criticism. And I think the
Right.
managers I gelled best with were the ones who were really a lot more. They were different than me. They weren't just like the completely analytically driven, hard nosed people. They were the ones who were more interested in the soft skills and actually being um, coming off as a counselor, someone who really cared about you. And that tended to be the women managers. The male managers were all
Right.
like
Okay.
one of my bosses who was MIT undergrad, Harvard Business School, Baker scholar, super smart guy, not particularly well organized, but super smart guy. And it was like I wouldn't say we clashed, but again, he was one of those guys giving me the reviews, and it was not easy for him.
Right. No, that's totally fair. Well, what were some of the qualities that the women managers had that you felt sort of helped guide you in the right direction there?
I think to some extent, like obviously they were very bright, but they were just softer in their approach and more thoughtful. Like I could see that they were being thoughtful.
Mhm.
Like, oh, okay, so you see it this way, but here's another way to look at it. And
Mm.
and I just felt like they were more interested in my personal well being than in scoring points by criticizing me.
Right. Okay, that's totally fair. You also mentioned in an earlier conversation, it felt like you likely had imposter syndrome, but didn't completely recognize it at that time. Looking back on that, how do you perceive that? And there's a lot of people today that feel that way, especially in management consulting, where you kind of feel like you don't belong because you kind of feel like you're out of your depth a little bit. How would you sort of address that? And what kind of advice would you provide?
Well, I, no one had that term in 1989 when imposter syndrome was not a term that anyone I knew used.
Hmm.
Um, but yes, there is this insecurity. I think understanding that you have it is a benefit. Understanding what it is, what imposter syndrome is, understanding that you might have it, that a lot of people have it, it's a universal or nearly universal. Um,
Hmm.
and the thing I'd say is if you feel like you're a little underwater, that's the best opportunity you have to learn. Those are the best
Hmm.
times. The times that I've learned the most have been when I feel a little bit underwater, a little bit overwhelmed. Um,
Hmm.
and the other thing that I'd say is when you feel like you're in that place, try to look back at what you've done in the past to give yourself confidence. This is what they tell us as parents to tell your kids, like, I know this is a real issue for you, but I have a lot of confidence you'll be able to overcome it. And the reality is, like, there are a bunch of things I've done in my life that I look back, and I don't mean this to brag, but there's some things like, oh wow, I did that thing. Like that was hard at the time, but I was able to do it. And I think that's true for all of
Hmm.
us. When I was an AC at Bain, like I was the first in my family to have graduated high school, let alone college. Like I was able to do that. I was able to navigate the American college application system and also the get a full-time job by myself without my parents' help. And that was something
Hmm.
I didn't fully realize or appreciate what that was, or the fact that I, worked in construction and worked long, hard hours and doing physical work, which a lot of my a lot of my fellow ACs had never done. It was hard to
Right.
appreciate that. One example I'll give you is my second or third year at Bain. I lived in a house with five other Bainies in Boston,
Hmm.
and uh, we had a living room on this. I was on the same floor. I had a bedroom on the same floor as the living room. There was a coaxial cable coming in for cable TV. And I was like, I could string this thing across over the suspended ceiling in the bathroom and then put it into the living room and then hook it up and we'd be able to watch cable TV. So I did that.
Right.
And all of my roommates, my housemates were amazed, like, wow, how did you do that? And literally I think I drilled two holes and I just pulled cable across, and I was amazed at how
Right.
impressed they were by this trivial, like amazingly trivial thing. But you don't
Right.
understand your own skill set until someone reflects it back to you, is the point I'm trying to make. And
Right.
uh, if you're in a position where you feel like you're overwhelmed, then trying to think about your skill set and what you've done in the past is helpful.
Absolutely. And it sounds to me like we all may have some degree of imposter syndrome, but I think just kind of reflecting and looking back on smaller things that you've done and achieved can sort of help you navigate around it a little
I
bit.
think so.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and just wanted to ask. Obviously, there's a lot of, let's say, arrogance, insecurity, maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome coming out of Bain. Then you went on to lead StubHub, Vivino, Kiva. These are extremely public roles, and obviously, no longer you don't have managers that are having private talks with you. Now you just have shareholders who are public that you're sort of reporting out to. How did your fears sort of evolve? And after having gone through these experiences, are there fears that still sort of linger? And what are some fears that or anxieties you wish you could sort of shed and kind of move on?
Yeah, I think there's still this fear, like, hey, maybe I'm not good enough. I mean, when you're running a company and all these things are happening, there are a lot of challenges. And I ask myself, am I up to the task? Can I figure this out? I try to be more upfront with, like, this is something I understand, this is something I don't understand yet. I think in the case of Vivino and Kiva, I was reporting to a board of directors, and the board wants to know that you got this. You have to have it figured it out. So actually showing vulnerability was difficult, if not career limiting, to be honest. Uh, but I felt
Hmm.
more secure about that. One of the things I did when I was at Bain was I went into therapy for the first time, and I had really this hang up
Hmm.
because, again, I was defensive and um, not completely confident of asking questions, of appearing stupid. But I came
Right.
to learn that was just a hang up I had. And so showing your ignorance, or at least saying, like, I don't know, and asking the question, it was hugely empowering. And I still do that now. Like,
Hmm.
but I also see people who just kind of pretend to understand what's being said because they don't want to appear dumb. I mean,
Right.
that happens all the time.
For sure.
Um, So certainly the fears I had were, am I up to the task? Can I figure this out? But I guess the difference now is, or the difference then was, maybe I will or maybe I won't. It's not like life threatening. It's okay. It's
Right.
okay that I don't have all the answers. You don't need to have all the answers.
Absolutely. No, it makes perfect sense. Wanted to just switch gears a little bit. A lot of people, in their careers, in high velocity careers specifically, it's very easy to sort of anchor our self-worths to financial success or
Yeah.
titles and promotions, especially when we're surrounded by people that are sort of doing the same thing. I want to explore how your relationship to money and identity has sort of changed over time. I mean, that concept has probably evolved for you significantly throughout your career. You were the son of Greek immigrants. Your parents definitely shaped the way you think about money early on. And then you were presented with a very different set of experiences as you went through your career. Just wanted to understand that story a little bit better and how you sort of evolved through that.
Yeah, I guess I was more motivated by status initially because, at Bain, we all more or less start at the same salary. Um, and I didn't fully understand, like, I had 7 job offers when I got out of college. It was a different time, 1989. Um, and I could see the numbers, right? They're all kind of in the same ballpark, more or less. Uh, but then quickly became about getting promoted. So
Hmm.
at Bain, you're an associate consultant, the equivalent of an analyst everywhere else, because Bain likes to use different terms. Um, and then after 2 years, after 18 months or 2 years, you get promoted to a senior or consultant in training is what they called it then, or a senior associate consultant. And then after 3 years, you could, in theory, be promoted to the MBA level, to the consultant level. And so I was very focused on that. Like I
Hmm.
wanted to be in the 18-month, like I wanted to be promoted after 18 months. And when I wasn't, I was very disappointed and angry and, asked why and all this stuff. And when I got promoted to that next level, I was happy about it. So a lot of it became about promotion. Um,
Hmm.
and even when I got promoted to consultants, that was one where I had a competing offer, so I kind of forced Bain to decide a month early. But I felt good about forcing them to do that because I felt like they had been manipulating me this entire time. So I felt good about manipulating them. Um, when I was after I got promoted to consultant after 3 years, moved to the London office from Boston. I worked in Moscow. I worked in Warsaw. I went back to London, and then I just was not happy with the job anymore. Like I had transferred with Bain because I just wanted an experience of working in Europe and working in Eastern Europe on privatization. I got that, but then when I went back to London, it was like the same old consulting stuff, and I didn't find it interesting. And so I decided I was going to leave, and I took a leave of absence. And a peer of mine got promoted to manager, which is the next level up. And I remember being very jealous of that, even though I had decided to leave.
Hmm.
Like I decided to leave, but I was still focused. Like, oh, that guy got
Right.
promoted. So it was all about the like
Right.
prestige of that and being promoted.
Hmm.
Um, when I moved to San Francisco, I just wanted to be part of a successful internet company. That was my goal. And eventually, I would
Right.
wanted to run one. I ran a startup that did online charity auctions, and I really wanted that to be successful, but it was a failure. Like after a year and a half, we shut
Hmm.
down, and I felt badly about that. It took me a while to get to eBay, and then at eBay, I went in as a senior director. I got promoted to VP, and that was very important. So again, it was more about like the status than it was about the pay.
Hmm.
There were times I didn't even know what my salary was exactly. I knew the ballpark. Um, once the
Right.
stock options kicked in, then that was real money. And I looked at that, but it
Hmm.
was all about like, okay, the first set of stock options once they were sold, that allowed me to pay off the mortgage, and prepare for the future, 529 plans for my kids, that type of thing. Um,
Hmm.
the first time I was asked when I first moved to San Francisco by a friend of mine who was running a private equity shop or who was working for Bain Capital at the time, he said, like, how much money do you are you going to make before you quit? Like, what's your nut, or whatever the stupid phrase was.
Right.
And I
Right.
was like, what? I had never thought of it. This at this point, I'm
Right.
7 years out of college. I'd never thought about like, what's the amount of money, the minimum amount of money I make that like, okay, I'm done and I retire. I knew people like that, right? Who said, I'm going to work as hard as possible. I want to retire in my 40s or my 30s. I never thought that way.
Mhm.
I just thought that you got
Right.
to work and that's part of what you do. And hopefully you get well paid. Um, and so I threw out a number. I threw out 100 million because I couldn't think of anything. And the guy's like, whoa.
Right.
The irony is that he achieved that number. I didn't. Um, but I didn't really think about it. You know what I'm trying to say? So it was only, I
Mhm.
guess, once I started making some real money at eBay as a more senior person, I started to think about like how much is enough and how much do I need to
Mhm.
retire? And then I got a financial planner and or to help us
Mhm.
think about that stuff. When I went to Vivino, I was very focused on the equity portion of my pay, and that was part of the motivation of leaving eBay and going to a startup. It's like I want to get paid for the value that I create, and I didn't feel that entirely happened at StubHub. eBay bought StubHub for 300 million and sold it for 4.05 billion. I did not get a meaningful percentage of
Mhm.
that delta, nor do I think I should
Right.
have. Um, but I did feel like as a CEO, you have a pretty big impact. You should make a lot of equity and get it that way. So it was only at that point I started
Mhm.
thinking about that. And the other thing about being a CEO is you can't get promoted. And I know
Right.
it sounds dumb, but once you're the CEO of a company, you can't get promoted. At StubHub, I was running it, but I was still a VP within eBay, so I could have been an SVP, and I didn't get promoted, and that really
Mhm.
annoyed me that they wouldn't promote me. Even though like
Right.
I'm still like you're still running StubHub, like
Right.
so
So what was the metric for success at that point in time if you're already sort of CEO and all your life you've been sort of chasing that next title? How did you sort of come to terms with the fact that, hey, like after CEO, there's really not much else I can do?
I think it's like just how
How
good
did you
of a CEO
navigate
can
that
you be? Like how
vulnerability?
big can the business be? How successful can it be? A lot of my self-worth was
Mhm.
driven by how successful the company was. Like how happy or how unhappy I was driven by how well we were at achieving the goals we set for the company. I'm not saying it's healthy, but that's
Mhm.
that's what it was.
No, that's great. So it almost sounds like I was going to ask if there was any particular turning points where money wasn't a primary driver and if it was sort of you slowly transition in, but it almost sounds like you never really wondered about money after a certain
Yeah.
point in time. It was just sort of about getting to the next title or the next role. You've been around a lot of, tech entrepreneurs, people like you just mentioned, somebody who's made a ton of money. Have you sort of seen wealth reveal or distort character, either in yourself or in people around you? You've been around a lot of these people, so what stories sort of come to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I still, and my parent, I just spent some time with my parents. They still have there's this Greek thing like, who are you? Big shot. My parents say big shot all the time. I don't know who still does, but they do. And so this idea of like, once you have a certain amount of money in your bank account, certain things you don't think about spending money on them. But I still think like,
Mm,
why would I spend money on when the kids were younger, like why would I spend money on getting everything organic when it doesn't really make a difference? And you have some parents,
mhm,
they hear that and they'll freak out. You say something like that, but why would I spend more money on something if I don't have to? I do see some friends who are like, oh sure, anyone who I had a friend who said like anyone who asked me for a donation, we just give them $500. Like okay, but that's not normal. Like you need to understand that, right?
right,
Um, or we always fly business class, or we always fly first class. I mean, I still
mhm,
fly economy. Um,
mhm,
so there's some things where I feel like this is how I grew up. I don't want to spend like a bunch of money on it. It doesn't make sense.
mhm,
It feels like I'm wasting it, even though I shouldn't have to worry about it. And I see other people who are a little more,
Mhm.
um, spend a little more freely. And sometimes I feel like, why, why do that? But I think it has more to with my up. It sort of seems counter to my upbringing.
Right, absolutely. So it sounds like your parents really taught you the value of just doing sort of the thing that's comfortable and feels right, not excessively spending money.
Yeah, being
So
frugal. I
you
mean,
grew up with
and
those
doing
values.
it yourself as
Yeah,
opposed to going out and lashing out a lot of money for something. Um, yeah,
for sure. And is it so what parts of those lessons have you sort of translated to your kids? Is there anything you intentionally don't tell them or don't teach them? What are some of those
I don't think
lessons?
they know exactly how much money we have in the bank, and I do hear them say like, look at these rich people. I'm like, I don't think we're not poor. Um, and they
Right.
are like they're not profligate. Like they are careful about how they spend. Well, it's not really their money, how they spend our money. Um, but I can't say like that was conscious. Like we did do things like we would go, if we went to the store and they'd say, "Oh, I want to get this." My wife would be like, "No, we're not buying this today. Like you don't need this. Put it back."
Mhm.
Um, but I can't say. And her parents are retired teachers and didn't make a lot of money, so both sides, like we didn't come from very wealthy backgrounds, um, and we have more money than our parents did. Um, but I don't think we made
Mhm.
a conscious decision. Like we never had a discussion that said like, look, we need to teach these kids to be frugal. Like that was not a conversation we've ever had.
Sounds like you just have great kids. They're sort of born with that nature, which
Well,
is very nice.
some of it I wonder like, okay, they are this way. And certainly, I love my sons, but they're not perfect. No one is. And sometimes there are aspects of their personality like, what is it that I did? How did I model this behavior?
Right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I often think about mistakes I made in parenting, but if
Mhm.
sometimes I struggle like, what exactly did I do that got them to think this way? Not that not that
Right.
I or my wife are the only influences in their life.
Mhm. I'm gonna ask you to sort of I'll push you on that reflection a little bit because obviously younger consultants today and younger high earning professionals today, they pin their identity a lot to that career or financial
Sure.
success. If you were to sort of provide these people with advice on how to almost unpin themselves and, look for just a higher purpose, what would you say to them to help them sort of achieve that mental freedom?
Well, I'll start by saying the regrets I had in doing the same thing. So when I was at StubHub, the StubHub colors were orange and blue, and I had employees that said like I bleed orange and blue, like they really cared about the brand, and there are a lot of people who really love the place. Um, and I had over time, I sort of showed my allegiance to the company by buying a bunch of things that were orange and blue. I had orange and blue wardrobes and shoes and all sorts of stuff. And then I left. I was there for 8 years. I left. I looked like all this orange and blue stuff in my wardrobe. I was like, why?
Right.
Like, why did I do this? People asked me if I was a Broncos fan. Um, so,
Right.
I just realized afterwards, it's not this extreme. Like, hey, I was in a cult. Like, what was I thinking? Like, why did I do this? It just seems, in retrospect, it seems really dumb, and I regret doing it.
Right.
Certainly, we look. It is not a bad thing to get value and feel valued because of the work that you do. That's a positive thing. I I would hate.
Mhm.
There are people who do jobs and they hate the job they do and they don't feel like they feel devalued because of the job that they do. So if you're working at a job where you like what you're doing and you like the fact that you're a consultant or a banker or whatever it is, that's great. But the reality is it's just a job. And jobs come and go,
Mhm.
they end. Sometimes it's your choice, sometimes it's not. I've been fired. Um,
Mhm.
you have to be your own person. There are things that continue. So I am the person that I was when I was in high school and college. I, I hope that I've evolved a little bit, but it isn't tied to my job. Um,
Mhm.
and you have to. I think if you're a young person, you have to determine what that is. Who am I at the core? Um, Being a parent is one piece of my identity that I value very highly. It's the most important job I've ever had, and that job only ends when I die. Period. So
Hmm.
that is a lot more important to me than who pays me or how I get paid. Um, I think the other
Absolutely.
element is like, what are the things that are of interest to you? Like, have some hobbies, do some things outside of work. Um, I'm learning to
Right.
play guitar. I think you can maybe see it in the background.
Oh, beautiful.
I mean, I'm not good at it, but I've been doing it for the last year and a half. And as someone in their 50s, I'm not particularly fast at learning things, or not as fast as I used to be. But, and I'm not saying that's my identity, but you need to do things outside of work. You need to have a friend group outside of work.
Right.
You need to have hobbies and things that you care about outside of work. Maybe it's a nonprofit you work with. Maybe it's um, maybe it's some form of art, some form of creative expression, something. But you need to be a full
Hmm.
person, and your job is just one element of that, and it changes.
Absolutely. And we've seen a lot of that where people have retired and they've been working all their lives, and that's sort of their identity. They don't really know much beyond that, and leads to a lot of sadness in their own personal lives as
Yeah,
well. Just
I think my dad's a
nothing
good
else to
example of
do.
that.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. We've seen a lot of immigrants sort of immigrate to a new country. They've worked hard to sort of survive and make ends meet and do what's best for their kids, but then that's all they do, and that's
Yeah,
all they know, unfortunately.
and then you have a big void
So actually, wanted to
afterwards.
touch that's right. That's exactly right. And I wanted to touch on, a little bit of regret minimization, which you sort of spoke about just a little bit ago. You made some big pivots, obviously, Bain to eBay to StubHub to Vivino to Kiva, and now your own consultancy. These aren't just really job changes, they're identity shifts in some cases. So I want to really unpack how you make those leaps. I would love to hear about one of those inflection points in depth, maybe whether that's Bain to eBay or, eBay to StubHub or StubHub to, even a nonprofit like Kiva. What decision making processes, you don't have to talk about all of them, but just, one which was a particularly tough one and how you sort of made that decision.
Well, I guess I'll talk about Bain to eBay, and there's a long period of time that that transition happened, but it was really about leaving Bain, leaving consulting, leaving something that I knew and that I was relatively good at, but that I didn't really enjoy.
Hmm.
And one problem I had was I didn't know what I wanted to do next, and I didn't have the time to do the job search. So I just kind of did it cold turkey, so to speak. I took a leave of absence, but that meant that I didn't get paid, and I was in London at the time, so I kept my private health insurance and my voicemail, and they let me use my laptop. And this
Hmm.
was the summer of '95, um, and I know many of the people listening were not born then, but that's okay. But the summer of '95, when I started reading about the internet, and the internet was very new at the time. Netscape went public that summer, and I got a CompuServe account, which was sort of the competitor to AOL, and I
Hmm.
used my laptop to dial up, like plug into the phone line and dial up
Right.
to CompuServe and surf the internet and learn about the internet. And I also read this book called "What Color Is Your Parachute," which is a career guidance book that had you do a bunch of exercises. And I realized like I really had this fascination with technology, with consumer businesses based on my experience at Bain. And I got fascinated by the internet. And so I just started focusing on, I really want to work in the internet space. And that drove me, that curiosity, that interest drove me and got me to leave London, move to San Francisco, even though I didn't have a job here.
Hmm.
Uh, and because I had something in mind and kept telling as many people as possible, eventually I found a consulting role at a startup. And then I got hired to run a startup that did online charity auctions. And then I tried to find a full time job somewhere else, and I couldn't. Between '98 and 2003, it took like 5 years before I found
Hmm.
the role at eBay. But I had this drive, like I was really interested in this industry, wanted to do stuff in this industry. And for those 5 years, I did consulting work as an independent contractor for companies. Um,
Hmm.
but my motivation was I really wanted to work in the internet industry. I wanted to be part of a great internet technology company, focused on consumers, and eBay was that opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. And you know what? A lot of consultants today sort of face that same struggle, which is trying to figure out when to leave because this is what you know, this is what you're good at,
And you're
and you
making a
know,
bunch of
I
money,
don't know.
and it's prestigious career, all that stuff.
That's right. And what's your advice to them? I know you sort of found a passion which allowed you to sort of make
None,
that jump,
none.
but for somebody who doesn't really, let's say, it's not necessarily that they don't have a passion, but they're just, I'm tired of this. I want to try something new. What's your advice to help them make that jump?
So to try something new, I think you need to do some type of taste test, so to speak. So
Mhm.
when I took my leave of absence from Bain, because I had it for like a year before I officially left. But at any rate, I told people this is what I was interested in, and they're like, "You should talk to so and so or so and so," and I would have these informational interviews, and I asked them what they
Mhm.
did. A lot of these people had Bain backgrounds, so they kind of knew what I did. Um, and 9 times out of 10, once they told me what they did, I was like, no interest, hard pass. Like, and so I
Right.
think it's a little bit, you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince. It, if you're interested in a
Right.
particular area, or you think you might be, talk to people in that area, try to understand what they do, what the business is like, maybe what the differences is. If they're someone who worked in consulting, how's this different than what you did in consulting? And you might get a sense of
Mhm.
like, I like that or I don't like that based on what I'm hearing, and pursue the things that you like. Um,
Mhm.
like with At the time that I was at Bain, there were some clear paths out, and those were often the working in the strategy team of a large multinational corporation. Pepsi was one example.
Mhm.
Lots of people went to PepsiCo, and then they worked on Frito Lay
Right.
or something like that. But I had no interest in that, so I didn't pursue it. I mean, I didn't even consider it. Um, but
Mhm.
it might be of interest to you, and if it is, you could probably find someone who's done that. Or I think the equivalent now would be someone who goes to do strategy at a large tech company. Okay, go talk to those people, figure out what it is they do, and see if it's of interest or not. But it's a kind of try before you
And
buy
what's
approach.
absolutely, and what's really interesting about what you just said, all the names that you've mentioned so far, is that you sort of leave Bain and you go work for a large MNC, pretty stable division in their strategy and ops roles. But you actually, if you look retroactively, when you joined Vivino in 2018, they were sort of in a crisis. And did you ever second guess that decision before sort of walking into Vivino? What inspired you to kind of take over that transformation?
Definitely there were times that I was with Vino. I was like, what have I done? Like, I'm now becoming a wine expert. I don't really care about this industry. Um, yeah, absolutely. I think, in the case of Vivino, I'd been looking for sort of the perfect thing for 3 years after I left StubHub and did not find it. And this was a business that was doing well. A lot of the dynamics about the business were working well. A lot of the problems were fixable. Um, and so I knew there were going to be challenges in taking it on, but I was willing to do that, and then felt good about when we were able to fix those challenges, or address those challenges, fix those problems. Um, but yeah, definitely there are times where like I'm not enjoying this. I think if anything, the problem I have is I stick to things longer than I should, and that's probably what happened with Vino. So yeah, there are times where I said, I'm not sure this is the right choice. But the other thing that I realized
Mhm.
was in those 3 years that I was looking for the next perfect thing, I didn't find the perfect thing. Um, there are many good things about Vivino. I don't mean to demean Vivino, but it wasn't the perfect thing in my mind. And I had friends who
Mhm.
had started a job, had finished that job in the 3 years where I was still looking. Um, and I kind of said to myself,
Right.
like, you're not going to find like I'm just wasting time now. Like, you're not going to find the perfect thing.
Right.
And then when I got to Vivino, I
Mhm.
was only there a year and a half. So I spent 3 years to find a job that I was
Mhm.
did for a year and a half. Like, that was dumb also.
Mhm. Well, what it sounds like is, for someone who's sort of looking to leave their role is just talk to a whole bunch of people, make sure that you're kind of well informed before jumping into a role. But it's almost okay if it's not a perfect role. You just walk into it, figure it out as you sort of do the job, and you can always switch later. It doesn't need to be paralyzing. You don't need to stay in
Yeah,
that role
exactly. I mean,
forever.
you're not. It's not a marriage vow. It is. You're not signing up
Hmm.
for a 20-year career where you get a gold watch at the end. No one works that way. If it's a bad
Hmm.
fit after a few months, you just leave and it doesn't show up on your resume. You keep going. Um, but it's an
Hmm.
opportunity to learn and to obviously to
Right.
be paid as well.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about operating principles. Bain obviously had their operating principles. Have you sort of developed your own principles, and well, are they similar to Bain's? I'm not sure, but are there philosophies that you sort of now live or lead your life by?
Yeah, I think I have some basic ways of working. I don't know if I've fully articulated those in my mind. Um, if you, if I think about the feedback I've gotten in terms of at least the positive things that I do, I'm very direct and honest. I think open, honest, and direct is the way that Bain puts it. So that's one of them. Although my wife always says that was a code for it was okay to be cruel to people. That's how she read it. But yeah, open, honest, and direct. So again, I grew up in an environment where my parents were very direct, and honesty is really
Hmm.
important to me. If I feel like someone is trying to
Absolutely.
snow me or get something over on me, I get really upset. And one way to understand your own values is if they're violated, you get upset. And so that's one of them. But I try
Hmm.
to be really direct with people. I don't try to snow people. I don't try to like spin things a certain way. I don't think there's any value to it.
Hmm.
And I don't like it when I'm on the receiving end. So that's, I think, one basic principle.
Hmm.
The other is a really important thing to me is creating a quality product and driving customer satisfaction. So at StubHub, we
Hmm.
spent a lot of time looking at Net Promoter Score and how we drove that number, but it was a source of pride for me and for the people on the team. Like, do the things that you are here
Hmm.
to serve customers and do the best job possible. That's really important to me.
Right.
Um, so you want to provide a great product, great service, um, and do what's right for the customer, because ultimately that
Absolutely.
pays back dividends. But honestly, the most important thing is it makes you feel good about the work that you do. And I think it's important to do that.
Hmm. And, and and having worked sort of, at Bain, at StubHub, in startups, in scale ups, in nonprofits, what are you seeing successful people are consistently doing that others are not?
Well, consistent is one piece of it. And sort of having
Right.
a kind of discipline in terms of the approach that you take. So if
Hmm.
your goal is to raise money, that requires a certain amount of perseverance and consistency and discipline, internal discipline. Um, I used to think, like being a good salesperson was all about being gregarious and reaching out to people. But the reality is it's a process and you have to keep grinding through. Like you have your set of prospects, you reach out to them, you keep going out to them, you keep going out to them. I think successful people are able to do that kind of grinding process discipline stuff that other people don't,
Hmm.
because after a while they kind of give up or it's not interesting. I think that's probably the most important piece, that internal discipline.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, I truly appreciate that. We've obviously covered a lot of big themes here: fear, purpose, identity. But I think people also love hearing the sort of little things that make you you. What makes you laugh? What do you do differently? What stuck with you? There's four questions right off the bat that I want to ask, sort of rapid
Okay,
fire style. Are you ready for
I
it?
think so.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll have
That
answers for you.
okay. Oh, okay. Well, let's start with the first one, which is the best investment you've ever made, whether that's financial or otherwise.
I think in terms of the payback, it was my time at Vivino, because I was able to sell some of the shares that I invested.
Fantastic. And what about conversely on the opposite side, the worst investment you've made?
Well, in the early days of the internet, I invested in a bunch of tech companies I thought were going to do great. One of them was Webvan. I don't know if you remember
Okay,
Webvan.
right,
Webvan did grocery deliveries, essentially like Instacart, or
right.
I guess more like Amazon Fresh. But I thought it was a great idea. It was just too early.
No, I am familiar with that company. It's really funny now because some of those companies are
Yeah,
actually doing
and the
quite well
irony is
today.
that the CFO, the last CFO of Webvan was Bob Swan, who was the CFO at eBay and a great guy, someone I really like. He became the CEO of Intel, but he was the CFO at eBay.
Mhm,
So it had great people.
mhm.
It was timing.
Absolutely. What about non-financial best and worst investment you made, maybe made in yourself or your family or whoever around you?
I think non-financially, the investment that I think was the best for me was really in my personal health. Um, Mostly
Mhm.
physical health. So I had open heart surgery in 2009, and I wasn't really that disciplined about working out and exercising prior to that. But since then, I exercise every day. And so,
Incredible. And I remember you also ran a marathon not too long
yeah,
after that.
my wife and I ran a marathon. I use ran loosely. Um, 15 months after that, and then after that, I started doing CrossFit. And a few months after that, I started to swim, and so now I swim 3 times a week, and that's I learned to swim laps in my 40s, but it's a huge source of joy for me. And
Incredible.
when I was in Greece just now, I was swimming in the ocean. So yeah, I derive a lot of pleasure from it.
That's fantastic. All right, what one splurge that you've made that you don't regret?
Oh, um, yeah, I don't really splurge on a lot of things. Um,
Or maybe you do regret, I'm not sure.
so when my so my wife and I are about 6 months apart in age, and
Mhm.
we both turned 50 in 2017. So we had a party, like we took over a restaurant, a small restaurant, but we took over a restaurant. So I guess you would count that as a
And
splurge.
for sure. No, that's helpful for perspective. I think it's really nice that you talked about something very meaningful in your splurge, which is incredible. Well, what's a moment that you think about more than most people would guess?
Um, when I was at StubHub, we spent a lot of time trying to be respected by the concert industry and the sports industry. And so we had partners. We were partners with Major League Baseball and with a bunch of college teams. But there was still this sense that like StubHub enabled scalping, and it was this dirty thing. And so, in order to do that, in order to kind of gain more credibility, we actively looked for an opportunity to get the naming rights to a sports stadium. And so I won't say where we looked, but we looked
Mhm.
at a Major League Baseball stadium. We were close to signing that, and then our partners at MLB killed the deal. Um, Partners like that, and so we looked at a football stadium that didn't go through. Eventually, we got the naming rights for a center owned by AEG, the concert promoter in LA, where the LA Galaxy play the soccer team. And so it was the Home
Mhm.
Depot Center, it became the StubHub Center, and that was in 2012. And so we went down there. They rebranded everything, um, and I got to speak, and my kids were there, and my wife was there. But it was probably the high point of my career at StubHub, and because we the team had worked so hard to get to that point, it felt like it was a validation finally of what we had done. And I just remember that day very well. It was really special.
Fantastic. No, I love that answer. And this is the last question, I promise. I know I went over the four
Yeah.
question limit, but if tomorrow Google went down, removed your name from the internet, you have no resume, nothing, what would you want your family to think of you as? What would you want to be remembered
That's funny
by?
because that question presupposes my family only thinks of me based on what they find on Google. Um, I would hope they remember me as someone who cared about them, who took the time to talk to them, to connect with them. I was in Greece and reached out to my cousins, some uncles, people I hadn't seen in a while. And even when I was younger, I've spent a lot of time as an adult making sure that the connections I have to people that I care about remain fresh and that I keep doing that.
It's truly incredible that despite having such a remarkable career, that this is sort of what's top of mind for you. You mentioned this earlier in our conversation as well, that it is now your job from now till the day you die to be a
Yeah.
good parent, which is incredible. And Chris, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for being so open with your reflection. I know that a lot of people listening, they're going to walk away thinking differently about their own path here.
Yeah. Thank you, Anand. I appreciate your questions and you're doing this, and I wish you every success.
This video is presented by VJ Wealth and produced by AQ Productions.